So our next key concept is this idea of conceptualizing variables. So there are different ways to measure the same variable. Depending on your research objectives, and in the context of this class, I want to emphasize this point that you are a social scientist here. So I need you to begin to develop your way of thinking as a social scientist. And so as such, I'm gonna put it all on you. Put it on. I'm gonna place the emphasis on the way you would move forward as a researcher. Okay, so depending on your research objectives, the same variable being the characteristic of human behavior, may be measured at different levels of measurement. So we discussed in a previous video that there are three different categories of levels of measurement that we're going to use in this class. We have the nominal level, the ordinal level, and the interval/ratio level. So let's revisit this idea of pain and how it is that we can measure pain with three different levels of measurement. From the nominal level, just as a reminder of its definition, remember that nominal levels of measurement are categories, right? These are categories. So asking the question of, are you currently in pain? Yes or no. People are going to place themselves into one of either category. In an example of an ordinal level of measurement, remember that ordinal includes some sort of ordering or some sort of ranking. If we ask the question, how bad is your pain, and someone responds with mild, moderate, or severe, we can order those as one category being higher or lower than another. Interval ratio, rate your pain on a scale from 0 to 10. So again, I know in the previous video when we were talking about ordinal and interval ratio variables, I described that rating your scale on a pain rating your pain on a scale of 0 to 10, we don't necessarily know what the exact distance is. However, it's important to understand that we can conduct interval and ratio level analyses, statistical analyses with this kind of information. So I did include here for that purpose. Not all variables can be measured under the same level of measurement. And so it's important to keep in mind that while we can do our best to try and develop different ways to ask a question, to produce different kinds of data that we can use in our analyses, it's difficult to make the claim that all variables can be measured under all levels of measurement. We're going to explore this idea of precision and power, and I want to introduce you to this idea that we'll revisit periodically throughout the semester. Researchers may need to redefine variables to increase precision or consistency and reliability of a research question, or to redefine or increase power, the probability that a study will detect a true effect. And so, what does this mean? Let's say we wanted to research this big, broad question of Southern California culture. If we want to affect the precision of our research, we can use specific, well-defined questions like how many times per month do you visit the beach? Now, in Southern California, especially for those of us who live a little bit closer to the beach than others, the beach is kind of iconic, right? It's a big part of Southern California culture for those of us who are a little bit closer to the beach. However, consider people who live far more inland. For example, in Blythe, California, which is one of the last cities that you are in before you cross over into Arizona. Answering a question like how many times per month do you visit the beach will give you a sense of how important something like going to the beach is to this broad question of Southern California culture. Another method, asking a question that will affect your precision is instead of asking about general impressions, we can use some sort of standardized measurement tool to measure cultural identity or community engagement. And what I mean by this is there are tools that researchers and statisticians have developed that ask questions about cultural identity or community engagement. And so by using these tools that have already been developed, we can, hope to increase the precision, the consistency and reliability of our research. One of the ways in which you can affect the power of your research, so again, power references the probability that a study will detect a true effect, is increasing sample size by recruiting participants from multiple locations like LA, Orange County, San Diego, going inland, right? Inland Empire or Riverside, increasing the sample size, the group from which you are collecting this information will increase the probability that your study is going to find a true effect. Another example of being able to affect power is using multiple methods. Maybe it's not just quantitative methodology, using survey to collect numerical data, but combining surveys with interviews and combining both of those with observations to help capture this larger question of Southern California culture. So there are ways that as researchers we can develop the tools and increase the likelihood of not only producing consistent and reliable data, but also finding true effects that exist in our data. Discrete and continuous variables. This is something I want to introduce to you here. We're not going to often revisit this as using the language, but I want to incorporate this into your toolkit, right, of language and behavioral statistics. So discrete variables consist of separate, distinct, and indivisible categories, such as family size or state of residence. If I ask a question, what's the size of your family, and you tell me we have 4 people in my family, then that is a singular, distinct category that cannot, I want to use the word bleed into another category. You can't have 4 people in your family and that kind of bleeds into 5 people in your family, so to speak, right? 4 people in your family or 5 people in your family, those are distinct and indivisible categories. If I ask you what's your state of residence and you tell me California, you can't really live in both California and Arizona at the same time, right? Even if you lived as close to that, separating that invisible separating boundary between California and Arizona, it's still one or the other. Continuous variables, on the other hand, hold an infinite number of possible values, such as age. If I ask you how old you are, you might tell me maybe you're my age, maybe you're 35. But we can measure age in years, months, days, hours, minutes, seconds, milliseconds, so on and so forth. There's an infinite number of possible values. So if I set myself up against someone else, I'm 35, that person's 35, but then you find out that person's birthday is in September while my birthday is in August, then we're starting to break down that variable into an infinite number of possible values. Constructs and operational definitions. So this is a piece that I really want to encourage you all to grapple with, because it helps to make sense, so to speak, of kind of bringing everything that we're talking about together to this idea of conducting social science research. So researchers need to determine how to explore a variety of topics. Constructs are internal attributes or characteristics that cannot be directly observed but are useful for describing behavior. For example, if I use terms like anxiety or humor, these are terms that are helpful for describing behavior, but they can't really be observed. How do you observe humor? What does it mean to observe humor? Now, if I ask that question, what does it mean to observe humor? And you start to explain to me, well, it's how many jokes someone makes, or it's how many times, we make someone laugh, then you are actually moving into this idea of operational definitions. And so these are the procedures for measuring external behavior. So, for example, we cannot directly observe humor, but we can observe the number of times someone tells a joke in a 2 hour period as a method to measure humor. Now, think about it this way, right? If we compare one of your favorite comedians to another of your favorite comedians, if you have favorite comedians, then how do you differentiate between who is funnier than the other, right? They're both engaging in this thing we call humor, but maybe it's determined based on how many laughs they get, or how much time they spend up on stage telling their jokes, so on and so forth. So, moving from this idea of a construct to an operational definition allows us to then engage in collecting data about these social phenomena.